Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Anacortes City Council meeting of March 3rd, 2025. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Mr. Franciac, could you take the roll, please?
Mr. Fantini.
Here.
Mr. Young.
Here.
Mr. Walters.
Here.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
Here.
Ms. Moulton.
Here.
Mr. McDougall.
Here.
Ms. Hubick.
Here.
Thank you.
Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Okay, a couple of announcements. We're on announcements and committee reports. A couple announcements from me. The 2026 Forest Plan update. So the Forest Advisory Board is still receiving public comment on the draft plan through tomorrow. That's March 4th, and they'll take those till 5 p.m. Again, please submit your written comments. Forest Advisory Board will meet on Thursday, March 6th at 6 p.m. to review the public comments that were received. This Friday is a First Friday Art Walk, so that's March 7th, this Friday, and I think Studio 98221 will be open for that. No, it will not be. Okay, just so you know. And then finally, Naval Air Station Whidbey Island is right down the road here. We hear from them quite a bit, but may hear a little bit more from them in the coming weeks. So they're doing repairs on runway 7 and 25 from March until November of 2025. So without this pilot talking with my hands, I will tell you what that means for Anacortes. It means during the closure, a runway 14 and 32 that heads northeast and southeast, the takeoff and landing approach will result in increased activities over eastern Oak Harbor, northern Camino Island, and Anacortes and La Conner and Lopez. If you have any comments, they have a number you can call or an email. But if you see something, you can try to describe the location and time of the event, and they'll happily take your comments, but ultimately it means increased air traffic over Anacortes. Let's see, next on the announcements committee reports, Fiber Committee.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. McDougall.
Fiber Committee met last week. Myself and Mr. Walters were in attendance. We first ran through the numbers. Current customer count is roughly 2,600 and like about 40, I think. And we have essentially take rate or market share signups of 52.1% across the city. So good news there. I don't know that it was, I'm trying to remember if it was announced, basically the fiber network hit a record for streaming or, carrying data during the hockey championship between Team USA and Canada of 11 gig, which was like pushing the limit of what our circuit was capable of. They recently, just a few days ago, upgraded the circuit to a 15 gigabit circuit, so that'll be ready for the next big sporting event. But also, really great to see like the amount of streaming. Like that really means like the community customers of the network have adopted streaming as an option, and so not using cable, which is great. It essentially contributes to the success of the network. We had a little bit of a slowdown in installations the past month, partially due to just basically weather, essentially, like the big freeze delayed some installations. We've got, let's see, the Summit X work happening in the EDA parcel is about 70% complete, and 100% of aerial and boring is done. Basically, over the next 6 to 8 weeks, we're going to be seeing customer installations begin in earnest in the EDA area. I guess the only other item of note here, a final block of IPv4 addresses was acquired as well. So another 1,000 of those, which should take care of us for essentially the remainder of the project and build out of the city. Anything else that I may have missed? Mr. Walters? Good.
All right, Mr. Walters shaking his head no. Any questions for the Fiber Committee? Okay, next up is the Public Works Committee.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. The Public Works Committee met at 5 p.m. today, and we talked about the upcoming Guaymas Ferry haul-out, which starts in 2 weeks, just about. It'll be March 15th. Tentatively through May 1st is when regular service should resume. They have a lot of engine work to do, and so this haul out will be longer than others have been. And it's going to be, the county's not doing a whole lot of outreach this year, as it turns out. So the city will be helping with that to the best of our ability with signage and everything. So we're hoping everything goes smoothly, but we are hoping with our fingers crossed. Wednesday. Sorry.
Mr. Walters,
Can I add on just a little bit to that before you move on?
Sure.
So specifically, apparently there will be no diagonal parking along 6th Street, which there has been in the past. And from 6th Street up the hill along H to 7th Street, that won't be one way, which it has been in the past. And under our current code, parking is prohibited along that curve. So I think that may capture the essential differences from previous years.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. Wednesday morning in Skyline, there is going to be a house moved to Skyline by a barge. It's going to land on the beach, and it's really large. I think it's like 28 feet by 90 feet. And it's going to be moving up Kingsway and Heather and Puget Way. So there are a lot of no parking signs there. It's going to be a major undertaking. So for 2 hours to get it, I think, to Puget Way, and then another 2 hours to where it will live. And that's going to start at 7 a.m. Wednesday morning out in Skyline. So if anyone wants to go take a look, that'll be the time to do it. We have a falcon coming to an upcoming council meeting. So we have decided that, and that is a good way to get rid of the seagulls. It's legal and probably not deadly. And so apparently the falconer has been here, and as she walked around the block around City Hall, the seagulls really kicked up a ruckus and like totally freaked out and then like vamoosed. So just seeing the falcon, it also scared all the other birds too, but so obviously it's going to be really effective, and she's going to let it go at some point, so that'll be really cool too. So, but anyway, the falcon will come to City Hall, so we'll get to see it in person. And that's it for Public Works today. Thank you.
it's a big bird. All right, any questions for the Public Works Committee? All right, next up is Parks and Recreation Committee.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. McDougall.
Parks and Recreation met last week, myself and the entire Parks Department. We covered a whole bunch of subjects. So first off, the Depot Plaza expansion, that design is moving forward. They're looking to bring kind of a bid package forward in early summer. The Anacortes Community Forest Lands plan is also underway and open for public comment both via email or on March 6th at 6 p.m. at the Public Library Community Room. There will be an in-person opportunity to comment on that. The West 6th in Minnesota Park, the department held a community meeting on January 30th at the Senior Activity Center. There were several participants. They took a lot of notes and great suggestions. And wanted to mention that Mr. Vox with the Parks Department is project managing on that. The Ship Harbor pedestrian trail, basically, a big chunk of it got washed out with storm, and they're looking at essentially a partnership with Samish and the Port of Anacortes, and looking at options for essentially doing a rebuild and what that looks like, and expect to have more on that coming in the near future. They're probably looking at like a 2026 kind of time frame. Let's see. Senior Activity Center, basically there is a open survey they're working on, or they've collected 700 surveys on basically a needs assessment for the Senior Activity Center, so that's also well underway. And finally, an announcement on the Cap Santee Lookout ribbon cutting, Wednesday, April 16th at 1:30 p.m.
All right, any questions for Parks and Rec?
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
The Parks Department indicated that they're looking at working with the school district to add pickleball to the school district tennis courts at 22nd Street. Wondering if the Parks Committee has considered potential impacts on the neighborhood from the noise of that.
Mr. McAdoo? Yeah.
We haven't discussed that one yet. I imagine the next one we certainly will.
I know the Parks Department is very aware of those challenges, and we'll make sure to have all voices heard. Any other announcements or committee reports I may have missed? Okay, I'll move on to public comment. This is a time in our meeting where any member of the public wishes to address the council on anything that's not on our agenda. I don't have anybody signed up, but if you're here to address the council, okay, somebody's here to address the council. So just make sure you state your name, yep, right up there to the podium. Make sure the microphone's on and state your name and the city that you reside in, and you get 3 minutes. Yep, I won't start the timer until you get the microphone on.
Oh, there we
Green
go.
light, yep, and you can adjust it too.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, a little bit. Make sure, adjust the microphone up a little bit so we can hear you. Okay.
How's that?
Perfect.
Awesome. So my name is David Spidell, and I'm a resident of Sequim, Washington, but I'm a frequent guest of Anacortes for over a year now. And basically, I'm here to express some concerns about police misconduct within the Anacortes Police Department, and frankly, the kind of a civil conspiracy to deprive citizens of their constitutional rights. And furthermore, I'd like to basically bring it to everybody's attention that I've become aware of evidence of tampering with the court record within the Anacortes Municipal Court, which is, I mean, it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up once I realized that. I mean, I was like, this can't be true. You know, that's such a big deal that, yeah, it kind of freaked me out, to be honest. And so while doing my own research in you know, the manipulation of the records in my case, and also police affidavits, I looked back to see what the trend was with the scheduled dates for the court recordings versus the published dates. And in correspondence with the court clerk, Rebecca Welch, it's my understanding, the way she explains it, is that the court clerk's office, they handle the taking of the court records, and then at the end of the court date, they publish those records to your website. And so, you know, anybody is able to then scroll down and see the calendar and the docket and all that, and click on a quick link to hear their recorded record of their court proceeding. And furthermore, while taking some traffic infractions issues I had, once my motions were denied, I believe unfairly too, I took it up to appeals, and lo and behold, my appeal got denied because I wasn't able to provide transcripts from the lower court, from Anacortes Municipal Court. And the funny thing is I was able to get transcripts for $104 of that court proceeding from there, but come to find that even back when I tried, I kind of forgot, I tried to get those transcripts from Anacortes, but was told by Becky Welch that Anacortes Municipal Court does not provide transcripts, but referred me to the website where I could view listen to the record. And so that slipped my mind before my appeal. You know, I'm representing myself, obviously. Anyway, so I go to look at getting these transcripts, and I'm listening to the website's record, and there was a concerning part during one of my hearings where I expressed to the court my concerns that the public defender was actively working against my interest in the case, and asked to represent myself, or get a public defender that actually was interested in a defense, which was these civil rights violations, and probably would have pointed out the obvious misconduct and stuff that I had to uncover for myself later. But anyway, I go back to She excused
So,
herself from
Mr. Spidell.
my case. Oh,
Miss-
sorry.
so-
I'll just wrap this
Okay.
up then. So anyway, while looking at that, I had taken my own recording, like as I'm doing right now today, and it's different than what's on your website. It's obviously been edited, and the publishing dates are different. So I'll leave it at that. That's all I have to say. Ray, do you want to say something or tell a joke?
Okay.
I have a joke.
Okay. Tell us what your name is first, and then you can tell your joke.
My name's Ray, and my joke is knock knock.
Who's there?
Possum.
Awesome. Who?
Possum relish on my hot dog.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right. Okay, anybody else wish to address the council? Okay, we'll check online. All right, next up is our consent agenda, items 5A and B. Council.
Mayor Miller,
Ms. Moulton.
I move to approve consent agenda items 5A and B.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Moulton, a second by Mr. Fantini to approve consent agenda. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. On to item 6A, other business. Finance update. This is a discussion item only and open for public comment. And Mr. Hoagland, whenever you're ready. It's all your show, and this is our only item on the agenda for tonight.
All right, thank you, Mayor, members of the council, members of the audience. Just wanted to go through kind of quickly, hopefully, just a little bit of the accounting background the city uses. It's not, and this, what we use is fund accounting. It's not really intuitive. It comes into play when we're doing our budgeting and looking at month-end results. So we'll go through this kind of quickly and then look at our year-end results by fund as well.
All right, I'll go ahead and make some comments there since you talked about it's not intuitive. There's really very little intuitive about government accounting, having been in private business for 15 years and in the government for 20 plus years. So, but that's where we're here. You're here to educate us all and help with that.
That's quite true. Yeah, and along with that, so fund accounting, I'll just be upfront and transparent, it's not efficient. It is an inefficient means of accounting. We are required to use fund accounting, as we'll see, but fund accounting, it's a little more cumbersome, but it does provide more accountability, and that's why we're required to use that. But fund accounting is a system for segregating financial resources to ensure and demonstrate legal compliance with restrictions or other special purposes. And as I said, it better illustrates accountability, and it's generally unique to governments and some nonprofits. So why would we choose to use fund accounting? We don't really choose to, we're directed to. So generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, direct that governments use fund accounting, and state law, RCW 4309-200. That's 4309 is the state auditor section. Section 200 states the state auditor shall formulate, prescribe, and install a system of accounting and reporting for all governments. And what that system is, it's called the BARS manual. BARS stands for Budgeting, Accounting, and Reporting System. So that system established by the state auditor, detailed in the BARS manual, which has a section regarding fund accounting, states a governmental accounting system should be organized and operated on a fund basis. So what is a fund? A fund is a fiscal and accounting entity with a self-balancing set of accounts. So what that means is we use double entry accounting. For every debit entry, there's a corresponding credit entry. It's a self-balancing set of accounts. It records cash and related liabilities, which are segregated for the purpose of conducting specific activities. So when you think of governmental activities, within the general fund, we have most of the, primary and basic services, public safety, the administrative functions, legislative, executive, and then we also have funds set up for other specific functions like parks, cemetery, library, road fund, et cetera. And sometimes when I'm trying to describe fund accounting, I'll use the envelope method of budgeting as an example. And if anybody's used the envelope method, it's very similar, actually. Envelopes being kind of a set of funds. So when you're setting up your money to go into each fund on how you're going to spend it, that would essentially be your budgeting process. When you take money out of the envelope to buy those specific things that the money is set aside for, you're processing accounts payable out of that fund. Or if you have multiple bank accounts set up for specific things, like I have an account set up for my Christmas shopping, vacation, car loans, things of that nature. So I have all these different funds set up. Money goes into those every month. Those are essentially my funds in my home budget. Okay, so we have governmental funds and enterprise funds. Like generally when we're looking at accounting funds, they kind of drop into those two categories, governmental funds and enterprise funds. On the left column here is our governmental funds, and this first section that I point out here, governmental funds use modified accrual accounting. So enterprise funds use full accrual accounting. So I'll go through each of these just kind of briefly, but to begin with, the general fund is a fund type in itself. So the general fund is the general fund. Every governmental entity in the world has a general fund. Even if you have an entity that doesn't use fund accounting and is set up as a single enterprise fund, like ports, I think hospitals and transit districts all have a single proprietary fund that they operate out of, and all of those would be a general fund. In addition to our general fund, which is the primary operating fund, we have parks, cemetery, library, road maintenance, and road construction fund, Washington Park Fund, Parks Construction Fund, the Affordable Housing Fund, impact fees, ACFL Fund, the ACFL Endowment Fund, lodging tax, and real estate excise tax. So looking at the numbering convention of these, the general fund is always 001. 100 level funds are special revenue funds, and 300 level funds are construction funds. Our real estate excise tax fund is set up as a construction fund, as that's what the statute directs us to use. And the enterprise funds, the 400 level funds are the utilities. 500 level funds are internal service funds. So the internal service fund is considered an enterprise fund as well. It operates under full accrual. It operates as a business, as an enterprise. The difference to the utilities, though, is all of the customers are internal to the city. They're all internal service customers.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hoagland. Are these all of the city's funds listed here?
We have, there are a couple of other funds. The only other real kind of operating fund that we have that's not listed here is Fund 611, which is the Fireman's Pension Fund. So 600 level funds, trust funds, are not required to be budgeted. So we don't generally include that in the budget unless we give it property tax so that we would provide more visibility on it at that point. But they're not required to be budgeted because they are operated by the means with which they are operated is by the ordinance that established that fund. So we do have the Fireman's Pension Fund, and that serves as the retirement funding for the years city firefighters worked for the city before the left system was put in place, and I think that was in 1977. So for the years, we have two pensioners now. Actually, it's a pensioner and a pensioner survivor that are still claiming benefits, and those are 4 years that those are for years they worked for the city before the state left system was set up. There's about, I think, there's about $177,000 in cash in that fund. We get fire insurance premium tax from the state for that fund, and we get about $24,000 a year, and we spend about $24,000 a year on our pensioners. So it's very little activity in that fund, and it does have a little bit of cash in case there's something that would come up that we would need to draw that for.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. McDougall?
I was curious about the internal service funds. Information technology is a kind of an internally billed service.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if there's a reason why it's in the general fund. Is it a threshold thing, or is
Yeah.
it just a category?
No,
We're
it's-
laughing because we've had this discussion on a
Yeah,
regular
and we just
basis,
talked
so-
about this last week, yeah.
Good,
Yeah, no,
great
it's-
question.
It's a good question. So when I first started at the city, there was 2 employees in that fund. It was a little over 100,000 in budget. It's grown significantly since then, I mean, for obvious reasons. And it's probably getting to the point where it makes sense to break that out of the general fund and establish an internal service fund for that to operate within. But to the, for a number of years, it really didn't have a material level of activity, and it kind of made sense to just couch it in the general fund. But yeah, it is getting to the point where we should start considering that.
But that being said, it's still tracked, there's still tracking that's
Yeah,
separate.
yeah.
It's just not labeled separately as
Yeah,
a
absolutely.
enterprise, as a
Yeah,
IR&R, whatever we would want to call it.
yeah.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters?
You indicated 300 level funds are construction funds, but road construction and parks construction are 100 level funds. What's the distinction there?
Yeah, and I think that's because, so generally construction funds, except for the REIT fund, are temporary, and I would assume that when those accounts were set up, it was because there were established tax revenue streams that were dedicated into those funds. It's a good question. We don't have general operations that run out of those funds, but that's what came to mind for me is that there were established revenue streams that were dedicated into those funds, so they were set up as special revenue funds.
Is there a need to create construction funds at the 300 level? So for instance, for the utilities that do a lot of construction work, is there a benefit to us to create those at the 300 level?
Yeah, so I like the idea of construction funds for certain things, and we've talked about from time to time the idea comes up to establish a construction fund for the road maintenance fund. It's easier to track those dollars that go into it than using that fund accounting to establish accountability that we were just talking about. Another thing that it would be useful for, as I said, they tend to be frequently temporary. So if we were to move ahead with a GEO bond to construct a new event center, it might make sense to establish a construction fund so all resources and all expenditures are captured within that fund just for ease of accounting and monitoring. As far as the enterprise funds go, because we operate them on full accrual, we have a lot more flexibility within the accounting system to establish those different types of that type of structure within the fund itself. So the 300 level funds we would probably dedicate to more of like a governmental activity, a road fund, a road project or a building construction, something of that nature.
I have seen other jurisdictions that use separate construction funds, though, for their utilities, and I wonder if that would help see from year to year on the sewer system, the sewer utility. Your operating costs are very constant, at least compared to when you add a $30 million outfall in 1 year. If that construction project were in a different fund, you would be able to see, I guess, more easily that the operating of the utility was at a more constant level and not with giant spikes because of the construction. Maybe that's not a good enough reason to create a whole nother fund for that, but something I was thinking about.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I hadn't heard of that being used in conjunction with an enterprise fund. I can see the value, but because of the, the additional flexibility that we have with full accrual, that it just hasn't really struck me the need, I guess. But I can see the value. It's interesting. Okay, any other questions before we move on? Okay, governmental funds. So governmental funds used for governmental activities, generally relying on tax revenues, use modified accrual accounting, and they use the current financial resources focus. So when you're looking at a governmental fund versus an enterprise fund, modified accrual versus full accrual, the reason those different accounting methods is for the financial perspective that you're taking of the fund. So under modified accrual, the fund reports all near-term cash flow and balances, but not long-term. So near-term cash flow and balances. So the biggest difference between modified accrual and full accrual are going to be in the balance sheet and revenue recognition. So on the balance sheet of a governmental fund, what you'll see is short-term assets and liabilities. You'll see cash, accounts receivable, accounts payable, but you won't see long-term assets like buildings and land. You won't see long-term liabilities like if there's a fund payable, if there's a bond payable for like a 20-year bond, you won't see those long-term payables. It's just the short-term resources and liabilities, that current financial resources focus. And the revenue recognition, revenues are posted when available, not when incurred. We'll talk a little bit more about the utilities, but you'll see the difference. But an example of that is at the beginning of the year when we establish our property tax receivable. We know what revenues we're going to receive in property taxes, but they're not yet available, so we don't report them as revenues. We offset the receivable with deferred revenue. And then when the revenue actually comes in, we'll relieve both the receivable and the deferred revenue. So ultimately, when you're using the current financial resources focus, what you're asking is this fund going to be able to pay its bills for the next year? So that's what the current term is in governmental accounting. It's the next year. Enterprise funds, and I think the copy in the packet, I apologize, but I had an extra box right here that talked about revenue recognition. I took that out. Enterprise funds used to account for business type activities, and that just means business or activities that are run like a business, like a private enterprise, generally reliant on user fees, uses full accrual accounting, and has the economic resources focus. So remember, the governmental funds was the current financial resources, current being the next year. Enterprise funds, full accrual, economic resources focus, so the entire stable of economic resources. So it reports all cash flows and balances, not just short term. And when you look at an enterprise fund balance sheet, you'll see all the assets. So in addition to cash, accounts receivable on the asset side, you'll also see land, buildings, equipment, infrastructure, things of that nature. Liabilities, same thing. You'll see the accounts payable, but you'll also see any long-term liabilities like bonds payable. And in full accrual, it records the effects of the transactions when they occur. So for example, when the utilities send a utility bill out, that bill goes out, and regardless of the collectible nature of that, whether it's available or not, it's booked as a revenue. And then when that revenue comes in, the receivable is relieved and the cash debited, so credit debit. Still double entry accounting, but it's just the receivable. It's not offset with deferred revenue, it's offset with revenue. Economic resources focus, you're not just concerned with the next year, you're concerned with the financial viability of the fund. Is it going to be able to pay its bills not only in the next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? You remember FCS coming in, doing studies on our utility rates, and they'll recommend a 5-year implementation of increased rates or 7-year, implementation, looking at the long-term viability of the fund. Questions about that? Okay, let's look at the year-end results real quickly, then we'll go through by fund. So it's the same setup as we've been looking at: governmental funds and enterprise funds. So all of these funds on the left-hand side, the general fund, park, cemetery, library. So these are actuals, actual revenues during the year, actual expenditures during the year. And then if money was made or lost, and I hate using that term, but it's just for lack of a better term. We don't make money or lose money, but we have revenues that exceed expenditures or expenditures that exceed revenues. It's just an easier way to describe that. But you'll see pretty much down the list there, we had an excess of revenues in the general fund. We had the bond issue this year that was booked as a revenue. Parks relied on cash reserves of $440,000, cemetery at $35,000, library just about broke even. Road maintenance, we used $757,000 in cash. Road construction, $460,000 in cash. Washington Park booked just about $36,000 into cash reserves. And then parks construction, we pulled out $93,000 in cash. Affordable housing is an in and out. That's the Yes for Housing proposition, and that's split between the Housing Authority and the Family Center. It's just the timing of the accruals and the transfers when those goes out. So we had an excess of cash at the end of 2023 that went out during the year. That's why it looks like that. Impact fees, that's money in. We didn't spend any impact fees this year. The ACFL fund, the only revenues we had were interest in earnings, expenditures of $44,000. The Forest Land Endowment Fund, we did not spend any money out of that, so that's got an unspendable balance, but as it generates interest earnings, those interest earnings can be used for specific issues. Lodging tax and REIT.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
When the Forest Endowment Fund generates interest, where's the interest go? Does it stay in that fund?
It generally, when we spend it, we'll transfer it into the Parks Fund. That's my recognition. It's been a few years since we've spent that, but.
Okay, 101.
Pardon?
101.
Yes.
And we would know if that would occur.
Yes.
Is there a code section governing that fund?
There, is there a code section?
Yeah.
Yeah, there is.
Okay.
I can't answer that off the cuff. I apologize, but
I'll find it.
It used to be this Fund 104 used to be a trust fund, a 600-level trust fund. We were talking about the different fund types earlier. A few years ago, GASB changed the definition of a trust fund, and our endowment fund no longer fit that, so we had to change it to a special revenue fund, but it still operates exactly the same as a trust fund. The water fund and sewer fund. Water fund, we banked $6 million into cash, and this is I think council is familiar with this, the way those revenues and expenditures fluctuate in the water fund is largely dependent on the CFP and what long-term projects we have planned. We try to stockpile, again, for lack of a better term, we try to stockpile that money before a project, so then when it times come to spend that money, it's available. If we are planning on a 5-year basis for, to collect money on the water rates, and we plan a multi-million-dollar project for that first year of the 5-year cycle, we're going to be short of cash. So we are very conscientious about the way we plan those projects around the existing rate structure. The sewer fund spent nearly $5 million out of cash reserves with the outfall project we have going on. The storm fund banked a little bit of money into cash reserves, $32,000, solid waste $136,000, and then ER&R $533,000. And ER&R again, sorry, Mr. McDougall.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. McDougall?
Yeah, when it comes to stockpiling funds for like maybe, a big project that's several years down the road, does that money go into, is it just like in a bank account or like a money market fund, or do we buy bonds on the market?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So we do, we invest the majority of the city's money in eligible investments, and that's pretty closely directed by by state law. What's available for us as a city to invest in is outlined in state law, and they're all very kind of like municipal bonds, federal
Low
bonds,
risk
things
stuff,
of that
I imagine,
nature. Yeah, but we combine the money. We pool the city's money. So we'll take money out of each of those funds to purchase an investment, and then once it matures, then those interest earnings come back to those funds at the same share that the investment was made. Yeah. Okay. I think this is my last slide, but the last thing I wanted to talk about. So this is taking a look at our cash balances. So let me go back one. So the last column here on the right-hand side, all the numbers in red, that's the amount of cash that we took out of cash reserves to balance those funds for the year. And council is aware, we've been talking about this for a couple of years now. Our revenues have been, our governmental revenues, tax revenues have been pretty flat the last couple of years, but we've had healthy cash reserves, so we've been able to maintain programs and staffing by use of those cash reserves. Looking at the 2025 budget, so this is looking at the year-end cash balance for each of these funds. So this is as of 12/31/24, and I guess I would use the caveat, the year-end reconciliations are not all complete. This is materially correct, but if you in the future see a little bit different number, that's why. But these are cash balances by fund in this column right here. So general fund's got 12.6 million, parks 709,000. You can see the list there. The last column here, the 2025 fund balance. Fund balance is the term we use for resources in the budget when we're using cash reserves. Okay, so the term fund balance is essentially a revenue resource to balance out our expenditure budget, but it's the amount that we're relying on cash reserves. So when you're looking at the general fund budget with all of the programs that we have in place for 2025, we are relying on 2.6 million in cash reserves to balance out the general fund.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Young?
Thank you very much. Mr. Hoagland, this is, very interesting. At some point in this presentation or this discussion, would you elaborate just a little bit more about the possibility of what's happening in Washington, meaning, budget cuts, all that, how that might affect the city of Anacortes and our projections?
Yeah, absolutely. Be happy to. Thank you, Mr. Young. So looking down through the 25 budget, you can see the amount of fund balance that we're projecting to use. So the statute in the budget section of the RCWs allows for the use of fund balance, but it directs that you have to have that amount of fund balance available to be able to support what you're what you're using it for. So if you can't budget use 200,000 out of fund balance when you've only got 100,000 in cash reserves. So I wanted to illustrate that we have the necessary fund balance reserves to support these fund balance uses in 2025. The one in green, and this is another oddity, just the way, it's because of the way the accounting works, but if you see a negative number associated with fund balance in the revenue budget, that's actually a good thing. In Washington Park, we're projecting to, all things being equal, projecting to bank 105,000 into cash reserves in Washington Park. Looking over at the utilities, pretty much across the board, planning on using cash reserves in the utilities in the coming year. We've got sufficient cash reserves in each of those funds. With the exception of ER&R, budgeting to bank 1.7 million into fund balance, and again, related to when those capital pieces of equipment are purchased, we collect that money ahead of time to make those purchases. So I know went through a lot. Do you have any questions? Be happy to dig into these.
I'm sure there's going to be questions.
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton?
Thank you. So when the 2025 fund balance column, that's what we're using from that particular fund balance. That's not what's in the fund balance. That's what we're taking out of the fund balance.
Yeah.
Just for clarity.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's enough.
Right.
Okay.
So all things being equal in the general fund, that being if all of our revenue projections come in exactly and all of our expenditure outflows come in exactly, we would end the year in the general fund with 10 million in cash. So it's just a matter of doing that math. The year-end cash in Parks, 709,000. We're planning on using 257,000. So again, keep in mind, this is for budgeting purposes. I mean, there's a couple things. Mr. Buckenmeyer used to love to say, I guarantee you it won't be that number when we get there. But we're actively monitoring these budgets, and if revenues don't improve or, we are continuing to monitor our expenditures, monitor the inflows certainly, but also monitor our expenditures. And when it makes sense, we've been holding positions open to try and save on revenues to see if, the economy is maybe going to turn and start strengthening again. That would make sense to start filling some of those positions where now we can put a pause on those.
One of the big active monitoring phases is always looking at where we are with council's policy on reserve. So maybe it might be a good time to highlight that one.
Yeah.
The question I ask you almost every day, anytime you give me a finance update, how close are we to that number? So when will we need to come to council if we do? And that generates why we have active positions open as we're monitoring. What is accrual? I never am going to get these government accountings right, but that the way we're looking at this year.
Yeah.
And we're monitoring to make sure we're within the our fund policy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we have cash balances we need to maintain, like these, at least some minimum of cash balance. And the general fund, Mayor's describing, if we go below that 17% threshold, then we're dipping into the general fund reserves. Likewise, looking at the rest of these funds, particularly the non-general fund funds. General fund has property taxes and sales tax and utility tax. The other funds are strictly reliant on property tax. Property tax comes in May and November. So if you look at the cash flow, it's kind of like a big, like two mountains next to each other. That cash balance comes down, and in May it jumps back up, and then it keeps coming down, and then November it jumps back up. Well, so you draw a line through the middle to get the average, but we still need enough cash to get us through those valleys. So we need some amount of cash that's more than zero in each of these funds to maintain financial viability in each of these funds. So that level, so looking at the Parks Fund, for example, year-end cash $709,000. We're going to be picking away at that a little bit through the year, planning on using $257,000. Once we get to the end of the year, we're looking at the 2026 budget. I don't know that we would be able to fund the same level of activity then as we are now with a lower level of cash, because we might not have enough to make it through that valley waiting for the next inflow from property tax revenues. I don't know if I answered the question or murkied the water more, but
Any member of the public want to jump in on this? And then I'll get to Mr. Walters. Okay. Okay, yeah, okay, yep, you got to come on. Everybody's got to come on up to the microphone, state your name and what city you live in. And
I'm Shireen McCool, and I live in Anacortes. I just had a question on the what fund name would the museum fall under?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question.
all right.
Yeah, it's a good question. So the museum actually resides within the general fund, and in this structure that I have tonight, I don't have that broken out. There's about 10 or so departments within the general fund. So the museum is actually one of the general fund departments. It's reliant on, it does have a few small revenue streams from user fees and things of that nature, but primarily on taxes. And this is, I can't say why a fund was never set up for the museum. It was kind of established before my time. It's not a huge department, but I will say we have at least one other fund that has a budget smaller than the museum that has its own fund. So I don't know what the thinking was that went into that, but it's a relatively small budget. It fits within the general fund now, and so that's how it was when I got here, and that's just kind of where we've left it.
So 001.
001, yep.
All right, we had another question from the.
Linda Martin, Anacortes. I really appreciate all the numbers and the different balances. Of all the numbers, the one that stood out to me is that we are taking $2.6 million out of our cash reserves to balance the budget. And at some point, you got to pay the piper. So I appreciate that you're watching. It might be time to start cutting back.
Mayor Miller.
I think Mr. Walters, I said he would go next, and then Mr. Fantini.
Thank you. Mr. Hoagland, the State Auditor's Office gave us a caution on the solid waste fund. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that was, a year or two ago, they brought that up, and we had a healthy conversation about that. That's something that we had noticed as well in the finance department, and we're monitoring that. What we did this last year when we got notice from the county that the tipping fees were going to be increased, since we had to address the increase in tipping fees, we did it's a phased implementation of tipping fees that the county gave to all of the municipalities. So what we did is calculated what that rate, that tipping fee impact would be at the highest level, and we increased solid waste rates to that level earlier in the year. So over the next few years, we'll be collecting more in user fees than we'll need to cover those tipping fees, and the thinking is that that will be what we use to make up some of that perceived cash.
We skipped over a bit the description of the problem, but
So what the what the auditors were calling out was a lower than preferred cash level in the solid waste fund.
It was close to about 100%, and it should be 120% for them, evidently.
Yeah, right. So yeah, that's a good point. That was a key point there. Thank you. Yeah, that's right. And I actually, we were at about 100%, and to me that seems like a reasonable amount when your monthly expenses are about 8% of that. But it was lower than what we'd prefer to see, and that was kind of the route that we took when we implemented the rate increase for the tipping fees for the county. Instead of doing it over a 3 or 4 year period like the county is doing with the municipalities, we put that full increase in last year, and so we'll be collecting more cash over those few years should be bolstering our cash reserves in that fund then.
So as that builds up until the full rate increase gets phased in at the county, we will be solving that problem, and then the problem will be solved until the next big change in rates?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thinking.
Okay.
And obviously, we'll be monitoring that to make sure that what actually happens is consistent with what we're planning. If we need to make adjustments, we'll come back to council and talk about that.
Mr. Fantini?
Thank you. I really appreciate all of this. I especially appreciate kind of breaking it down of the envelope and your own personal finances. I think that's a really easy way to understand it, because I know that for me looking at this, if I was taking 15 to 20% out of my savings account every year, I would be extremely nervous that I was going in the wrong direction. So I do want to also voice support again. I know Ms. Cleland McGrath has brought it up a few times for a bigger discussion around our revenues, because without increasing taxes, which we don't really want to do, I would assume, there's not a lot of other discussions going on how to fix our revenues. I have some questions coming up when you go into your street impact fees, but I also wonder, I know that we've been waiting on a significant sum to come through from a disaster relief grant, and it seemed like last week we got an update that we're getting closer on that number. Would that impact what I'm seeing on my screen here?
Yeah.
And
so,
what would that look like when we do?
Yeah, that's a good question. It kind of brings us back to what Mr. Young was asking about earlier. So I guess a couple of things I wanted to point out. That's a big number, $2.6 million for the year. It's shocking and terrifying. I guess I would say with like almost 100% certainty, we won't see that at the end of the year. We continue to monitor revenues and expenditures. We do have a number of positions that are open that we're taking a wait and see attitude on. So that 2.6 deficit is based on 100% of our expenditure budget being expended, and I just don't expect that that'll happen. And then some of that is going to be related to capital expenditures, things that we knew we'd be spending money on, like a one-time purchase, continuing the fiber build-out, things of that nature. But I did want to make it clear that we are actively monitoring it. And but yeah, so back to the question about the FEMA replacement monies, the funding that we had requested for those would come back into the general fund. It was for equipment that was all, we were conscientious about that, about what equipment we identified that those replacement funds could be used for, and they were out of either the general fund or the road fund, parks fund, funds that had used their money to buy equipment that rely on tax revenues that had purchase these equipment. So if they didn't come back into the general fund, if it came back to the parks fund, it would still be, a tax-funded fund that would benefit from that.
And I think I talked about it at the last council meeting, but I usually get about 85% of it right, so I'll say it again. We've gotten to the point where at least the local FEMA reps and us, i.e. the consultant that we hired, to determine the cost of replacing the project, which was the 2021 disaster where the trail fell into the ocean. It's allowable under the alternative reimbursement under the Stafford Act, so we went for that. So the good news is we think we've come to the agreement that it's 2.5 million, Steve, so, but now the next hard step is, okay, we're past that. Where's the decision-making process? Again, on the outfall, I wasn't sure we were going to get a dime of that 3 years ago, but we did get 10 million. But that's a very different, again, it's still under the same law, under the Stafford Act, and so, we're hopeful, but that's the number. At least we're down to what we think the number is.
Yeah,
So
and so
correct me
far,
if I'm wrong on that.
yeah, that's exactly right. And so far, the communications that we received have been positive. We haven't heard that that funding was going to be cut off or pulled back or anything like
it would be
that.
fair to say if that money miraculously showed up tomorrow, you would adjust that scary 2.6 number.
It would turn green
yeah.
then.
And
Yeah.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters.
To reassure the public a little bit, just a little, if, say, we were funding a big construction project this year from the general fund, say maybe fiber, and we went out for a bond at the end of last year, collected a bunch of money to fund that fiber, and this is an oversimplification of exactly what we did, but if you collected that money in the prior year to fund fiber in this year, you would show a significant use of fund balance, which is perfectly appropriate and necessary, unless we had excess revenues that we could use to fund the fiber build out. So I think that, the red numbers here can look scary, but they're not necessarily an indicator of bad news. They can be, but in this case, not necessarily. And I think the bad news that we've been talking about is news that you can't find within the budget, can't find on this slide. It's future projections of how much are things going to cost in the future, especially when we've experienced 20% inflation over the last 3 years, reducing our purchasing power, and resulting in the need to increase employee salaries and benefits so that they can keep up, so that we can continue to employ people. Those numbers aren't captured here within the budget or on this slide. And it's those kinds of things that we really need to be careful about. And I think what is generating the need for that longer term conversation.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Fantini?
Just a quick question. What would our red number have been for, say, 2024 and 2023, just estimated? Do you have any idea?
I'm
Last
sorry?
couple of years, have we been short the last few years? So if we had if we're projecting 2.6 for 2025, we probably know what 2024 and 2023 was.
Oh, well, I know what 2024 was. So we know what 2024 was. We went through that here. 2023, I don't have off the cuff, but 2023 was the first year that our sales tax started declining. It was barely down compared to 2022, so effectively flat.
So to Mr. Walters' point, this is sort of a little bit of an anomaly what we're looking at in 2025.
Well, yeah, when you're looking at, say you're looking at a 10-year budgeting period, certainly, yeah. And that's what, we've been pretty good about that as a city when things have been good to put, bank money into cash reserves in preparation of years like this so that we have those reserves to draw on when the economy slows down. That's what we've been seeing the last few years. Not a terrible slowdown. It doesn't appear that we've been in a recession, but our revenues have been pretty flat, not increasing.
But
Thank you.
wouldn't it be safe to say that the general, over the past couple of years, the general fund reserve drawdown was to pay for fiber?
Yeah, that's exactly
big-
right.
the
And
big-
that's
big
a really,
numbers.
it's a really key.
We didn't lose that money because of inflation,
Yeah.
Council made a conscious decision that we were going to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And
that's worked out well, where we've got 20-some million dollars of fiber in the ground, and now we're bonding 12 million. That's not a terrible thing. But it doesn't look great on paper as far as, yeah, our reserves are going down.
Yeah, it's a really important point, that planned use of cash reserves for those one-time projects like fiber built out. We've done that in parks, for parks projects, for road projects as well. But it's been a few years of that outflow for the fiber capital, but looking out, projecting out on the long term,
But it does get
looks
more
like,
painful when your sales tax revenues aren't coming in as high as you would like them to be. So
What-
it gets squeezed when your sales tax revenues
Yeah.
are trending in the not great direction.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, as you looking at long-term projections for revenues, it looks like this fiber project is going to end up being a real boon for the city and work out exactly as all of you had envisioned it 5 years ago.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters?
So similarly with sewer, maybe this is a better example to take. Expecting to spend 5 million, spent 5 million, because that's 2024. Can you go to the next slide? So you got 8 million fund balance, so year-end cash, so we're expecting to spend 1. Is that how the math worked there? Refresh my memory. Or are we expecting to spend 8 from fund balance for sewer?
Yeah, so expecting to spend 8, but no, that's a really good catch. Something looks wrong there. What it looks like is we didn't factor in grant drawdowns.
Okay, so
grant
let's not use that
reimbursements.
example. Let's go back to the prior slide. Maybe you can revise that one and get it to us, because I was putting it in my notes. On the prior slide, in the previous year, we were expecting, and assumedly we did spend 5 million from fund balance.
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just have to spend money from fund balance because you acquired this money in the past, either through saving up rates or through bond or through FEMA reimbursement or, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably not reimbursement in this case, but if you save up money, eventually you will spend down fund balance.
Yeah, and the red numbers never look good, but it is a planned use of that cash at that time. I mean, in this case, that's exactly what it is. And looking over at the road maintenance fund and road construction fund, that's exactly what it was. Planned use of those resources that we had accumulated in those funds.
All right, sorry, Steve, are you wrapped up with that? Oh yeah, we were at questions a while ago. Any other questions?
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters?
So I think it's fair for us to ask, what are the red flags here?
Yeah.
And my sense is the red flags are REIT, we're expecting to spend it down from 3.5 to 2. Parks, we're expecting to spend 260 of the 700. And if I recall correctly, we've done that for a couple of years. And so we're using up the parks cash.
Yeah.
Library to some lesser extent. What else?
And that's, I really like that question. I appreciate that. So looking at all these red numbers, and again, that one at the top, the general fund, that's one that we'll keep the closest eye on. The use of REIT for public works projects, we can scale that back. I mean, council, that's at your discretion, but that number can get scaled back. We can move projects out into the future and reduce the amount of REIT that we're going to spend. If that were to drop off the table altogether, that's an easy fix.
Except that we use a certain amount of REIT each year to fill in the gap in our pavement management program.
Yeah, that's true.
Do you happen to know what that number usually is? Of the 1.8 million?
Yeah, it was, I think it was 500,000 last year, or
Okay.
2024, that we transferred into Fund 104.
So we need to have somewhere around that number available each year in order to maintain a $1.8 million pavement management budget.
Yeah. Road construction fund, that's another one. It's pretty much in and out. Road maintenance, a little less so, but still there's flexibility there as well. The funds that I worry about the most is the Parks Fund, the Cemetery Fund, and the Library Fund. They're very dependent on property tax. And as you know, property tax is limited to 1% per year, plus new construction. That works out to 2 or 2.5% per year. When operating costs, typically grow at, 8 to 10% per year, it's obvious that that math doesn't work. So we need to rely on higher allocations of property tax from year to year, and we can only get that if sales tax and utility tax go up in the general fund, so the general fund can have a smaller allocation of property tax. I've said this before, in Washington State, municipal finance only works in a growing economy. We have not seen a growing economy here in Anacortes for going on 3 years now. But those are the three funds that I see the hardest time in cutting back in, and would need to get more support from the general fund to maintain current level of service.
That's a great segue and a preview to next week's council, where we'll have Mr. Hagan, right, from the county assessor's office. Properties tax discussion. Okay.
I do have a couple other quick things
okay,
if there are no more questions.
Oh.
So I apologize not getting this into the
that's right. We were going to do a little real-time update.
So I brought in the impact fee report. I didn't think I had shared this with council yet, and this is something in our code that we're supposed to share every year, and we have these impact fee reconciliations done now. They were easy to do this year because we didn't spend any money in 2024. But this is a really busy chart, and I'll walk through this kind of quickly. But I'm showing 10 years of the history because the impact fees are required to be spent within 10 years of collection, and I wanted you to see how we track that money over that 10-year time frame. So the columns here, 2015, 2016, 17, 18, this is showing the cash balances. So we jump out here to 2024. In 2023, we ended the year with $14,195,000 in cash. That became our starting balance of 2024. We collected $43,428, so we're ending the year with $57,623. And I have these color coded so you can see the yellow 57,000 here corresponds to the yellow 57,000 down here. This section down here is where we track when we collected the money to ensure that we're spending it within that 10-year time frame. In 2023, here's that $14,194 ending cash. And what that comes from is the prior year, we ended the year with $722,000 in cash, and we spent $784,000 in 2023. So we spend our oldest money first. So of that $784,000, we spent this $122,000 first because that was collected back in 2020, 2021. Sorry, I should have put lines on here. But you can see how if you follow that row back, you can see in 2020 we collected $192,000. And that money was required to be spent within 10 years or by 2030. So following this $192,000 across collected in 2020, that moves over into 2021. We spent $88,000 in 2021. So the $18,000 collected in 2019 was spent first. Then we dipped into the 2020 money. That left $122,000. Moved into the next year, we didn't spend anything. Moving into the next year, that $122,000 was the first money that we spent. Then we spent the $328,000. Then we spent the $271,000. So you can see how we were left with this $14,000. That moved into 2024, and then we collected 43,000 2024 for a total of 57,000. And I have a feeling if I had the spreadsheet and sent it to you and you could see the formulas, maybe it would make a little more sense. But I did want to illustrate that this is what I show to the state auditors when they ask us, how do you ensure that you spend the money within 10 years? I show them this.
It's always amazing to me that that's the state auditors, because I can pretty much guarantee that we'll find a way to spend the money, but they're very much, it's a very complicated formula, and I know you have to work really hard to figure out for it, but it's first in, first out money. Anybody who's held securities for long term.
Yeah.
It's not that complicated, and they care a lot about it, but I don't think there's probably been any municipalities that say, oh, we look at all this money we have left over that we forgot to spend. We're usually pretty good at spending it, I guess.
It'd be a nice problem to have.
And we didn't really have a problem with that, have we, Mr. Hoagland, spending that?
Yeah. So street impact fees, within the impact fee fund, we have 57,000 in cash. Parks impact fees, we have 201,000. And fire impact fees, we have 419,000. And you can see which is, you can see which of these is the oldest of that money.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Fantini.
I have a question about straight impact fees. This makes sense to me as far as how you're tracking it and everything. And obviously, I assume that pretty much street impact fees come mostly from development and whatnot. And our numbers are down because we've had less development in the last few years. Is development the sole source of street impact fees?
Yes.
So when I was at the AWC conference, there was a very interesting point that was brought up about Amazon, talking about how, is there ever a way that we can collect, because obviously I don't know how many times a day an Amazon truck goes by your house, but by my house it's many, many, many times a day. Obviously they're getting a lot of use off of our streets, right? Is there any way to charge them an impact fee for using our streets? Is that something that we're
I'm not sure if we have the authority, but there is state legislation.
Would that have to come through state legislation?
There is state legislation out there. I don't know what House bill or companion Senate bill it is to charge delivery vehicle one time 35 cents. The last time I saw it, again, I don't know what House bill it is, but it's out there.
But that's not anything we could do, obviously, at the city level. That would have to come from the state legislation.
I don't think so as a code city. I might have this wrong. I think charter cities may have more options, but within a code city, I don't.
Okay, I was just curious about that. Thank you.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
The other important thing about impact fees is a term of art that comes with all these strings, like the requirement to spend them on projects that are in the CFP and within 10 years and those kinds of things. We also should expect, as Mr. McDougall has mentioned a number of times, and we really wanted to achieve the last time we calculated the impact fee, we are now going to have a state law obligation to recalculate impact fees, including on a new basis, on the basis of square footage rather than just dwelling unit. So I assume that we're preparing for that after we get done with our transportation master plan and our other planning documents that provide the projects for the CFP that get calculated into the impact fee. But our impact fees used to be very low. 10 plus years ago, there was actually a MRSC report that listed everybody's impact fees in a variety of jurisdictions. Anacortes was near the top, alphabetically, and there was this footnote that said, Anacortes has a very old methodology for calculating impact fees. It was kind of embarrassing because MRSC was circulating this as a great example of excellent staff work, but there we were at the top. So we fixed that, but then we are charging quite a bit more for development now between impact fees and connection fees. Really adds up. And I think I haven't looked at what our costs are in a while, but the last time I looked at, say, Mount Vernon's, it was in excess of $35,000 per dwelling unit for a single family residence. They also have school impact fees, which aren't levied here by our school district. But those are really significant in terms of boosting the cost to produce housing. So we need to think carefully about that. The new state formula based on square footage instead of dwelling unit will help. On the other hand, our street impact fees may go down substantially because the preview, I guess, is that there aren't going to be very many projects in the transportation master plan that are related to level of service, that are development driven. So the important takeaway, I think, is that it can only be spent on projects that are the result of impacts from new development. That's the impact and impact fee. So it doesn't help us with pavement management. It doesn't help us with overlays and those kinds of things, unless somehow they are driven by new development.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
Thank you. Does that mean that we can't use them for pedestrian connectivity, those impact fees? I guess to follow up with Mr. Walters' comments. Could you answer that?
Miller?
Oh, Mr. Walters, I think, is going to try.
Pedestrian connectivity might be part of a street or it might be part of a park. It just has to be driven by the impact from new development. So in our last calculation of street impact fees, we did include sidewalks on Oaks Avenue, I think, as one of the qualifying projects, which helped drive a significant amount of the impact fee calculation. It just has to be driven by new development. So I would say the answer is not a no, but it's conditional.
So Mayor Miller.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath, yep.
Thank you. So that would make me inclined to make sure that when we look at our projects for the CFP and that analysis that we are going to see, that we make sure we articulate the importance of, as we have increased traffic, the importance of having bike lanes and improvements of pedestrian connectivity, because there are a lot of neighborhoods that don't have formalized sidewalks. And that is kind of the biggest challenge, especially when we look at the West Streets, when we look at the neighborhoods between Commercial and R Avenue. I would like to see that articulated if we can use those funds.
Mayor Miller,
Yep.
I'm trying to remember, Mr. Walters, maybe, I thought that, I guess I'm trying to remember if those projects need to be included in the impact fee study that's set, so they do. So there's two requirements. It needs to be included in the CFP, also needs to be included in the impact fee study that established the impact fee rate. Okay. Last thing I put up here that I brought with me, I did include the spending. I think we've talked about this. I couldn't remember for sure, but we put this together and in the process of getting this added to the city's website. But for 2024, in our TBD spending, we spent $2,002,000 for the year. And this is a pretty comprehensive list of projects that we spent that money on. That's it for me.
All right. Anything else? Any other burning questions? All right, great discussion. And no further business for the council. I'll adjourn tonight's meeting.